Crime and violence had been the identity of Australia for over 250 years, but while the streets flowed with blood, cocaine and grog, one gallant woman paved the way for hope, redemption and equality. G'day everyone and welcome back to another episode of A Tour Guide's Tour of Australia. I'm your host and guide Jack Clarkson, and this is the long-awaited episode for Gallant woman Lillian Armfield. Today's episode still keeps us in Sydney but leads us through the vibrant suburb of Darlinghurst, or as it was once called, Razorhurst. Now, I know I need to address the elephant in the room. Yes, there has been almost a year since the release of episode 3 part 3, and this has just been due to life, work and adventures and everything else in between. Now, most of you know what I've been up to, and if you follow my socials, you'll understand, but those stories are for another day. For now, I'm back. Not much of a return after only 3 episodes, but besides Mum and Dad, I don't have much of a following, so yeah, this'll do. Today's episode is just me, no other guests, and I'll be doing a few more of these solos every now and then, and this one focuses on one of the other tour companies that I used to work for, which is called Dark Stories, and specifically the Razor Tour. Now, as the name suggests, Dark Stories tells, well, dark and unpleasant stories. I mentioned this in my first episode in the part about my journey to becoming a tour guide, which led me to this company. What I've learned working for these guys, I've incorporated into every aspect of my tours so far. Everyone loves a bit of true crime. Streaming services are plastered with crime documentaries, and there are hundreds of podcasts dedicated to true crime. The obsession is crazy, but it makes sense when told well. The realism of these horrible, disgusting and traumatizing stories really tickles at the curiosity of the viewer and listener and draws us into the thrill of a real-life whodunit. Now, I prefer true crime that involves a collective group instead of one individual. It's the stories of the past retold by retired detectives and criminals who lived, breathed, and battled with the big names of a particular time period that really draw me in, where the tale of one person crosses over with another, and then with many, to make an intertwined web of stories. Then pair this with the struggles of the time period and the towns or cities where the events took place. For a main character often neglected in these stories is the place where the events occurred. Tie all of this together and it paints a better picture for the crime at hand. As much as I enjoy kicking back and watching a documentary or catching the train with a podcast on, I'd rather be telling these stories in person. I love watching the emotions change on a guest's face, with the gruesome, wholesome, anxious and emotional range showing through each and every story, getting into the nitty-gritty of the heroes, the villains and the victims of crime in an honest and true way, keeps their stories alive, never forgotten, and making sure that they remain a part of history for as long as possible, or at least until the stories run dry. I got my start working for Dark Stories after joining Bridge Climb. The first tours I was doing were the Rocks tours in the Rocks in Sydney, and this was until I learned enough about the Razor story to be good enough to be put on those tours as well. Yes, the crime committed through the Rocks was based on individual cases and mostly one-off stories, and I love telling those stories as well. But being able to tell the Razor War story in its entirety is so much more fun, and with an intimacy born from having smaller groups with people who had previously seen the Underbelly TV series, it makes it more rewarding and worthwhile. It's on this tour where I would lead people through what was once a decrepit place full of poverty, bad smells, and vile criminals, the likes of which we haven't seen in many, many years. Now turned into the tidy manicured streets with cute little alleyways, cats running around, cafes and restaurants, which is a complete shift to its past to talk about the Razor gangs. A period in time where sex, drugs and jazz ruled the city, where two queens, Kate Lee and Tilly Devine, grew to power and controlled the streets, where crime was the only way to survive in a time of depression, and without strong role models around, impressionable young boys would turn to crooks to teach them the ways of life, and desperate women and teenage girls would sell the only things they had, their body, just for somewhere warm to sleep. There's recurring characters like, of course, Tilly Devine and Kate Lee, but you've also got the gangsters with Norman Brun, Frank Green, Greta Coletti, Phil Jeffs, Nellie Cameron, plus so many more. From the start with the introduction to the end of the tour, there's crossovers, betrayals, sex and murder, and the tour visits houses, landmarks and streets, where some of the most famous and notorious events took place, with residents inside none the wiser about the stories that these walls could tell. To most listening, the Razor gangs may ring a bell. It was the story told in the incredible Australian crime drama series Underbelly Season 4 Razor, and written about in great depth in a book by the same name written by Larry Writer. To others, it may be stories passed down from their great-grandparents through the generations, alongside tales of the construction of the Sydney Harbour Bridge, Jack Lang's reign of power, the first public radio broadcast, or even the Spanish flu outbreak. But today's episode isn't about the villains, it's about the heroes, and one in particular, Detective Sergeant Lillian May Armfield, with actress Lucy Wigmore playing the incredible Lillian Armfield in Underbelly Razor. If you don't know the story, the best place to start is obviously with the series or the book. But if you want a quick little taster, head down to the Police and Justice Museum in Circular Quay, a less than 5-minute walk from Circular Quay train station. The museum boasts a large collection of policing and criminal history and memorabilia from all times and periods of modern Australia. It's situated in the old water police station and holding cells of Circular Quay. Now, after you've spent an hour or so walking around the museum and once you've bought your ticket for the tour, you can either head back to Circular Quay station, hop on a train, get off at Town Hall, head down to Platform 5 and ride the eastern suburbs line to the infamous or famous King's Cross. Once there, you'll emerge out of the station, following the crowds to the main drag of Darlinghurst Road, turn right, and head to Darlinghurst Fire Station just past the giant Coca-Cola sign to be ready for your tour. Or you could take the more scenic route by turning right outside of the museum onto Macquarie Street and stroll past the New South Wales Parliament and Old Barracks, where you can gaze upon the architecture and history, or you can pop in for a tour and a visit as well. Then make your way through the lush and peaceful Hyde Park, where you can stop and admire the Archibald Fountain and look upon the beauty of St Mary's Cathedral. There's also the Anzac Memorial and Museum to check out while you're there. These all lead you to William Street, a long straight stretch of road that goes through the centre of Hyde Park and leads straight into the giant Coca-Cola sign of King's Cross. No, this is not sponsored by Coke, I promise. Cross the road to the Australian Museum side and make your way up to Darlinghurst Fire Station. The fire station is where the tour actually starts. By this point, the night should be falling and the mood will be set. Delivery riders are zooming down the roads in all directions. Music floods the air. Laughter and singing can be heard amongst the clinking of glasses in all the bars and restaurants. Then once everyone is ready, the tour begins. From the introduction, we'd zigzag through the streets talking about various events and making our way to Darlinghurst Jail, a monumental sandstone prison turned into the National Art School, a place where Henry Lawson, famous Australian poet, did 2 stints for drunken disorderly conduct in public and skipping out on child support. You'd follow the walls around to Oxford Street, where the old courthouse and the Oxford Hotel meet in Taylor Square. On a peninsula-type point resides the circular old English-style 2-storey turret, like the kind you'd see on the corner of a castle or a fortress. It has this deep vintage red brick and sandstone exterior matched with its arched windows, allowing light to engulf and penetrate the rooms inside. Where above one of these windows remains a large sandstone sculpted piece of the royal coat of arms featuring a lion and a unicorn. This is now known as Qtopia, an LGBTQ museum. This is once, though, the Darlinghurst Police Station, a building so conveniently placed within close quarters to the courthouse and the jail. A place where you could be arrested, tried and hanged in the same day. A place that has seen the worst kinds of people walk through those doors, and a place where the good would battle evil on a daily basis. It's here where I usually talk about 2 heroes, Big Bill Mackay and Lillian Armfield. To hear Bill's story, you'll have to book one of the tours, but for Lillian's, stick around. I'll do this one shortly. So why Lillian Armfield? Well, there's no direct personal connection besides the fact she is from a hometown region of the Southern Highlands in New South Wales. She's a tough bush girl trying her best in the city. In An Age of Progression, there's hardly any talk about Lillian. There's 2 books, Lillian Armfield by Lee Straw and Rugged Angel by Vince Kelly, which is more or less a memoir of sorts, an interview with Lillian herself on recounting her memories and time as an officer. There are also 2 podcast episodes I found that tell a bit about her story, one by Annie and Phoebe with Chickstory, another one from ABC Podcast with Fierce Girls. She's the trailblazer for a lot of women's rights in Australia and the Commonwealth, and was once the inspiration for many generations of women throughout the entire country. I feel that this story, in this day and age of progression, is one of importance. Now, the reason why I have chosen this story today for my triumphant return is because over the last year I've spent a lot of time reflecting on the tales that I have recited for my tours, and there are many that have had different impacts on myself, many that have had impacts on my guests, and I'll go over those in future episodes with those particular stories. Now, I haven't hosted a Razor tour in about a year, but thinking back to when I did tell these stories and this particular story on that tour, the location still stands out to me as clear as day. Some of the faces of the guests that I have had still stand out to me as well. And whenever I did tell the story on my tours, albeit a little bit shorter than what I'm about to go into, there was always a positive reaction from my female guests. Happy tears have been shed. I've seen the glimmer of hope and pride in their eyes. I've seen the glow of inspiration in some of the women's faces. And in a world full of uncertainty right now, what's wrong with sharing a good story? So who is Lillian Armfield? On the 1st of July 1915, 5'8" Lillian May Armfield created history by becoming the first female policewoman in the entire Commonwealth, alongside Maud Marion Rhodes. With light brown eyes, brown hair, and a fair complexion, she would take on the underworld of Sydney up against the likes of Chitty Fu, Iris Furlong, Phil Jeffs, Notorious Kate Lee, and Savage Tilly Devine. Lillian was born in my hometown region of the Southern Highlands in New South Wales in a town called Mittagong on the 3rd of December 1884. She grew up in a town called Berrima, and she was the second of 8 children, the eldest of the surviving, with 3 passing away close to childbirth. She had 2 brothers and 2 sisters. Lillian was raised in the country. She's described by her family as being intelligent, adaptable, tough, imposing, resilient, and beautiful. She could look intimidating, but was gentle and caring and genuinely wanted to help people. Her parents instilled into her and her sisters that they could be just as tough and as important as the boys, and raised them with a good education which allowed them to follow whichever path they chose in the future. However, Lillian is a descendant of thieves. Both of her great-great-grandparents arrived on the 1st and 2nd Fleets. James Roose, who became the first convict to earn freedom and own land alongside Elizabeth Roose, née Perry, who was the first woman to receive freedom and arrived on the 2nd Fleet. They began Experiment Farm in Parramatta in 1770 to grow crops and food for the colony. They eventually packed up and moved to the Hawkesbury to escape the rise of attacks and thievery by convicts and bushrangers on their property. Her great-grandparents were Elizabeth Roose, daughter of James and Elizabeth Roose, and Edward Hobday Armfield. These two crossed paths around 1813 after Edward arrived in Australia from Scotland to work in a shale mine gathering kerosene as a free man. Soon after his arrival, he became a police constable in Windsor. This was at a time between the convict police force and an established police force where free and trusted men were encouraged to apply. Crime and justice flowed through her veins from the very beginning, and the tough grit of surviving in any environment would guide her through her biggest challenges in the future. In 1907, at around 23, she moved to the Big Smoke to work as a nurse at the Gallant Park Hospital Asylum for the Insane in Gallant Park, Lilyfield, Sydney. Here she would tend to, as the name suggests, the mentally unwell, as well as criminals deemed too crazy for the public. Lillian was employed to look after the female patients. She had to maintain a strong, unrelenting and disciplinary approach to dealing with these difficult cases to earn her the respect and authority over them. The women sent here were from vastly different circumstances. Wayward girls sent here by families or police, displaced women in the streets, single mothers, prostitutes, vagrants, women with connections with dangerous men or gangs, even single unmarried pregnant women were sent here for more or less to be retrained, reprogrammed, then released back into society as law-abiding citizens as good women, which rarely happened. The job came with its challenges, often having to physically restrain and forcing sedatives into these women who would be frightened and anxious in these dark and dim places. These poor women and girls were mixed in with violent men, aggressive women, and people with actual mental insanity health issues. It's here she grew into the tougher and stronger woman with a bigger desire to help other women in the city.